Most people perceive childhood as a temporary stage of life, one that is concluded and left in the past. They see it as an archive of memories, old photographs, traumas that have been resolved or suppressed, and attitudes that adulthood is meant to supersede. However, Carl Gustav Jung uncovered a reality that fundamentally challenges this widespread belief. An inner child resides within every adult. This is not merely a symbolic recollection or a remnant of past feelings, but an actual psychological force, a vibrant archetype that functions quietly beneath the surface of the adult psyche. It actively influences beliefs, derails choices, alters relationships, and defines entire personalities. This internal presence, which Jung identified as the archetypal child, is far from dormant. It doesn't slumber, waiting to be forgotten. Quite the opposite. It functions as a profound, often subconscious, source of energy that holds both the most pristine qualities of our being, such as creativity, sensitivity, and the capacity for awe, as well as our most primal and profound injuries: abandonment, rejection, humiliation, and invalidation. In his clinical work, Jung noted that a majority of adult psychological distress stems from the suppression of this inner child. Rather than acknowledging it, nurturing it, or integrating it, we are taught to conceal it. We adopt facades of maturity, fulfill social expectations, employ rationalizations, and develop vices to keep it confined. In doing so, we incur a significant cost. This cost manifests as neuroses, existential dread, persistent anxiety, emotional dependency, a sense of meaninglessness, and the endless reenactment of self-defeating patterns. The core issue is that this child does not vanish simply because we ignore it. In fact, the more it is denied, the more it emerges from the shadows in covert and chaotic forms. Adults who lash out with rage at minor feedback, who feel unseen in their partnerships, who perpetually search for approval from authority, or who struggle to set firm boundaries, are often not just being immature in the conventional sense. They are being steered by the wounded child within who was never truly seen or validated. This leads to the most crucial and potent aspect of Jung's philosophy. This child does not need to be fixed as if it were a flaw. It needs to be acknowledged. It requires a valid place within the adult's internal world. For Jung, authentic psychological maturation doesn't come from disowning the inner child, but from cultivating what he termed the internal paternal ego, the capacity to nurture oneself from the inside, fostering a dialogue between the wounded aspect and the protective aspect. This is where true emotional maturity begins. It is not about silencing pain, but about attending to it. It's not about feigning strength, but about cultivating genuine resilience. This video serves as an invitation to reconnect with this neglected part of your psyche, a profound exploration into the concept that your inner child is not a hindrance to your adult existence, but rather the very key to unlocking your true self-creativity and emotional liberation. Recognizing this internal dynamic is more than a therapeutic endeavor. It is an act of psychological self-preservation in a society that increasingly encourages us to be disconnected from our true selves. And perhaps by gazing into the eyes of the child we once were and continue to be, we can finally grasp why we feel so exhausted, so adrift, and so perpetually in need. The solution was never external. It has always resided within, and it was small, vulnerable, and unseen. Until this moment. To Carl Jung, archetypes are not abstract concepts or literary devices. They are active psychic frameworks that exist in the collective unconscious, shaping our actions, views, and feelings with a power that transcends ordinary logic and reason. Among these archetypes, very few are as influential as that of the inner child. What Jung discovered was not a wistful memory of youth, but a dynamic psychological presence. It is a hub of emotional energy that persists within every individual, irrespective of their age. This inner child is not confined to history. It expresses itself in the here and now, in your spontaneous reactions, your deepest longings, your most illogical fears, and the very manner in which you engage with the world and with others. It is typical for people to associate the inner child with specific memories or events from their past. But Jung's idea was far more profound. The child symbolizes the self in its formative stage, embodying both the start of the journey toward individuation and the untapped potential for future growth. It is concurrently vulnerable and sacred. Within it, you find the core of spontaneity, sensitivity, curiosity, and creativity, but also the most severe wounds, unprocessed traumas, and feelings of helplessness, shame, and abandonment. This internal presence shapes adult behavior in subtle yet powerful ways. When it's disregarded, the inner child surfaces through seemingly exaggerated reactions, emotional volatility, irrational insecurities, a fear of being left, a constant craving for approval, and an inability to handle criticism or setbacks. Countless adults spend their entire existence directed by this wounded inner child, even while holding positions of power, raising families, or projecting an image of public success. The inner child is indifferent to social status. It simply demands to be acknowledged. The archetype of the child also possesses a dual nature. It can serve as a conduit to our healing or the origin of our deepest dysfunctions. When integrated, it connects us to our creativity, intuition, and a sense of lightness. When suppressed, it undermines everything we attempt to create. For this reason, Jung considered this figure one of the most critical components of the unconscious. He asserted that ignoring the inner child is akin to severing a part of one's soul, and that any pursuit of personal or spiritual growth that neglects this reconnection is ultimately bound to fail. However, not all inner children are identical. Jung noted that this archetype manifests in various forms, each with unique needs and distortions. Some quietly seize control, while others cry out desperately for notice. But all of them exert their influence. And to fully comprehend the effect this force has on our lives, we must learn to recognize its many faces. That is precisely what we will delve into next. The three primary manifestations of the inner child that Jung identified, and how each one might be quietly dictating your most ingrained patterns. If this information resonates with you, please consider clicking the subscribe button to support the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Carl Jung didn't just identify the existence of the inner child as a single entity. Through his clinical observations, he saw that this archetype adopts several distinct forms within an adult, each possessing specific requirements, strengths, and imbalances. These forms are not strict classifications, but rather fluid patterns that weave together, creating the unseen bedrock of our behaviors. Recognizing these different faces is vital for understanding the origins of our most automatic and distressing reactions in adult life. The first of these is the wounded child. This aspect holds our traumas, both overt and subtle. Abandonment, rejection, emotional neglect, physical or psychological abuse, and the constant dismissal of our feelings. This is the child who learned, often at a very young age, that voicing needs was risky, seeking attention was shameful, and that trust would ultimately lead to hurt. When it is not integrated, the wounded child appears in the adult as a fear of closeness, chronic anxiety, patterns of codependency, emotional hypervigilance, an inability to trust, and a persistent void that no external success can ever fill. This is the child that compels us to overreact to criticism as if it were a threat to our very existence, to perceive rejection where none exists, and to perpetuate cycles of self-neglect. The second face is the eternal child, also known as the pure eternus. While the wounded child is mired in the past, the eternal child seeks to escape the present. It is the part of us that resists growing up, shies away from responsibility, and cannot tolerate frustration. It craves constant stimulation, immediate gratification, effortless praise, and has a deep-seated fear of limitations and commitment. In an adult, this child can manifest as chronic procrastination, volatile relationships, an aversion to routine, an inability to build anything lasting, or a sense that adulthood is a trap. Jung did not view this as a moral failing, but rather as an indication that the vital energy of childhood had not been channeled into a mature form of expression. The third is the divine child. This represents the most profound, creative, spiritual, and intuitive potential within a person. It is the aspect of ourselves that still marvels at the mystery of life, that experiences existence as a sacred journey filled with endless possibilities. It is the wellspring of our insights, our authentic compassion, and our capacity for wonder. But tragically, this child is often stifled by the pain of the other two. Without the freedom to emerge, it retreats and becomes dormant, leaving the adult feeling disconnected from their creativity and sense of meaning. Jung observed that the majority of people live predominantly under the influence of the wounded child, responding to the world from a place of emotional deficit and survival mode. We look to romantic partners to be the parents we lacked. We react to criticism as if it's a personal attack, and we establish patterns that unconsciously replay the narratives of our youth. This is not a sign of weakness. It is the direct result of a powerful archetype operating beneath our awareness. Identifying these three faces is not a mere intellectual pursuit. It is a fundamental key to profound self-awareness. When we can identify which of these children is driving our actions at any given moment, we take the first crucial step toward reclaiming authority over our own internal world. But to achieve this, we must first recognize how, from a young age, we were conditioned to conceal this inner child behind social roles and masks, a defense mechanism that seems to shield us, but, in reality, makes us sick. It is these masks of adulthood and their role in suppressing the inner child that we will discuss in the next segment. From a very young age, we are taught that certain feelings are unacceptable, that being too emotional is a sign of weakness, that crying is shameful, that relying on others is a mark of inadequacy, and that being highly sensitive is a character flaw. As time passes, this emotional conditioning, characterized by suppression and subtle punishment, instructs us to wear masks of strength, of control, of independence, of maturity. We construct a socially approved version of ourselves, engineered to be pleasing, to be effective, to sidestep rejection. But this constructed self is frequently a hollow facade, built upon the systematic denial of the child who still resides within us. Carl Jung noted that this suppression of the inner child, disguised as maturation, is a primary source of modern psychological distress. Repression does not make pain disappear. It merely relocates it. What the conscious mind attempts to push away, the unconscious mind retains. Suppressed anger morphs into anxiety. Unacknowledged needs become compulsions. Stifled vulnerability manifests as addiction, self-sabotage, or psychosomatic conditions. Instead of healing our wounds, we become masters at concealing them. These masks appear in many forms. There is the facade of the responsible adult who endlessly cares for others but neglects themselves. This person is often driven by an inner child who learned that love is conditional on being useful. There is the mask of the strong and invulnerable who professes to need no one, never shows tears, and handles everything independently, but whose inner child was compelled to mature too fast. There is also the facade of the high achiever who performs, excels, and impresses, but is perpetually exhausted from trying to earn the validation of parents who may have never truly acknowledged them. These masks are unconscious efforts to create emotional security in a world that penalized our vulnerability. The issue is that these strategies alienate us from our authentic selves. They forge a divide between who we truly are and the persona we present to the world. And the wider this chasm becomes, the more profound our sense of emptiness. It is a void we attempt to fill with consumerism, with distractions, with relationships that deaden our feelings, or even with a shallow form of spirituality. But none of these can substitute for psychological truth. The inner child does not fade with time. It waits. It waits for recognition, to be heard, to be embraced. And until that happens, it resorts to sabotage. Not from malice, but because that is the only language it knows to capture our attention. Many adults live for decades in this cycle, dismissing the inner child in the name of maturity and, as a result, living an emotionally barren life with superficial connections and recurring existential crises. They think they need to be tougher, more efficient, more logical, when, in reality, what they lack is the opposite. They lack sensitivity, the ability to listen, and presence. They lack an internal figure capable of caring for the child who was never properly cared for. They lack an internal source of protection and nurturance. And it is precisely this figure that Jung referred to as the internal paternal ego, the psychological function that enables the adult to become, for themselves, the parent they never had. This is the true starting point of healing. And it is what we will explore in the next section. If the inner child is a living, active presence within us, how can we engage with it without being overpowered by its wounds? Carl Jung's solution is both profound and remarkably practical. The goal isn't to suppress the child, but to cultivate an inner adult who knows how to care for it. Jung called this the internal paternal ego, a psychological function that acts as an inner parent, capable of holding, protecting, and providing what the wounded child never got from the outside world. Contrary to popular belief, emotional maturity isn't about outgrowing the inner child. It's about building a relationship with it. This demands something few of us have truly cultivated: conscious self-compassion. The internal paternal ego is this capacity to become an observer of your own experience, to recognize when the wounded child has taken over, and, instead of reacting impulsively or shutting it down, to initiate an internal conversation. It is the ability to say to yourself, "I see you're hurt. I am here. I will not leave you." This simple internal shift has a transformative effect. Consider a common scenario. Someone criticizes or rejects you. You feel an overwhelming reaction: rage, profound sadness, or an immediate desire to retreat. Instead of just acting on that impulse, the paternal ego can intervene. It acknowledges that it's not the adult self that is suffering, but the wounded child reliving a past experience of abandonment or invalidation. By doing this, you fundamentally alter the internal dynamic. You shift from a state of reaction to one of active self-care. This process is the heart of genuine psychological maturity. It is not about becoming cold or emotionally detached, as many mistakenly believe. It is the exact opposite. It is about fostering a kind of inner presence that can hold pain without becoming consumed by it. It is about being both the child who feels and the adult who cares. This integration is what mends a fragmented psyche and makes it whole. But this doesn't happen through rational understanding alone. The paternal ego must be nurtured. It takes practice, intention, and most importantly, a commitment to your own emotional truth. Many people attempt to heal childhood pain solely through reading, meditation, or therapy. While these are helpful, they cannot replace the inner work of learning to care for yourself as a kind parent would care for a vulnerable child. This is where we enter the practice of reparenting, the process of giving your inner child what it never received. In the next part, we will explore precisely how to do this, not in theory, but in practice. We will look at the attitudes, internal postures, and behaviors that can build a new kind of relationship with your wounded child, a relationship that is no longer dependent on the external world, but is cultivated from within. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow explains Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious offers a 30-day guide to apply them. Both are available via the link in the pinned comment. Most people assume that time mends the wounds of childhood, that maturing, becoming independent, and achieving emotional self-sufficiency are enough to put the past to rest. The reality, however, is harsher. Time heals nothing that remains unacknowledged. The wounds of the inner child stay open, not just in memory, but in the body, in our relationships, in our automatic responses, and in patterns that are passed down through generations. This is why Jung outlined a radical and deeply transformative practice: reparenting. To reparent yourself is to consciously become the adult you needed when you were young. It is not about dwelling on the past, endlessly reliving trauma, or becoming lost in regret. It is about forging, in the present moment, a genuine connection with the most sensitive and wounded part of your psyche, and providing for it what your original caregivers, due to their own limitations, ignorance, or trauma, could not. This involves offering emotional validation, a sense of inner safety, clear boundaries, and most importantly, the permission to exist exactly as you are. This process starts with listening, a deep, empathetic listening. Not the intellectual kind that tries to analyze pain, but the emotional kind that welcomes whatever surfaces without judgment or attempts to fix it. The inner child does not want to be corrected. It wants to be seen. It wants to know that its pain is valid, that its fear is not irrational, that its need for love was not a burden. The reparented adult is not someone who has become immune to pain, but someone who knows how to tend to their own vulnerability without self-abandonment. Reparenting also requires setting internal boundaries. Often, the inner child looks to others to provide what the conscious adult has not yet learned to offer. It seeks safety in unhealthy relationships, validation on social media, and love in connections where it must diminish itself to be accepted. Learning to say no to these urges isn't a rejection of the child, but a protection of it. It's like saying, "You don't have to beg for love anymore. I am here. I will take care of you now." Another critical element of reparenting is the practice of emotional self-regulation. This means cultivating the ability to soothe yourself, to offer presence during moments of turmoil, and to find comfort without turning to compulsions or escapism. These are simple yet profound actions. Pausing to breathe when anxiety spikes, writing to yourself as if you were comforting a real child, or choosing to step away from toxic situations even when it's difficult. Each of these acts sends a quiet but powerful message to the unconscious: I will not abandon you again. Over time, this practice begins to shift something deep within. The wounded child's cries soften because it is finally being heard. Impulsive reactions lessen because an adult is now present and in charge. Relationships transform because the inner void no longer needs to be filled at any price. The energy that was once tied up in defenses and repetitive patterns starts to flow freely, and with it returns creativity, sensitivity, and a genuine passion for life. This is the essence of true healing, not erasing the past, but creating a present where old pain is met with acceptance. Reparenting yourself is, fundamentally, a revolutionary act. It is a declaration that your story does not have to end where it was broken, that a new possibility exists, not to change what happened, but to radically alter how it lives within you today. But something even more powerful occurs when this inner child is no longer viewed as a liability, but is instead acknowledged as a source of wisdom. It transforms. And it is this transformation that we will discuss in our final segment. Because when the inner child is heard and nurtured, it reveals its true nature, not as a problem to be fixed, but as the key to a renewed life. Something profound occurs when, after years or even decades, the inner child is finally acknowledged. The pain that once appeared as chronic anxiety, emotional dependency, destructive relationships, and a bottomless void starts to gently recede. And what arises from this process is not merely relief, but strength. Not an aggressive or performative strength, but a quiet power that comes from reuniting with exiled parts of yourself. When this child is no longer treated as a problem, but is embraced as a vital part of your being, it ceases to operate from the shadows. It no longer has to sabotage your life to get your attention. It no longer needs to scream inside you whenever someone rejects, criticizes, or dismisses you, because it now knows it is not alone. There is an adult present, a mindful, protective, and available adult. An adult who has learned to love, not because they were taught how, but because they made a conscious choice not to repeat the pattern of abandonment. At this stage, something almost miraculous unfolds. Pain makes way for creativity. Scarcity is replaced by genuine connection. Anxiety transforms into presence. When the inner child feels safe, it reveals its highest aspect, the divine child. This is the part of you that is not afraid to feel, to create, to explore, to be filled with wonder. It is the part that holds the deepest meaning of existence. Jung stated that the child is a symbol of wholeness, and when it is integrated, a person stops living a fragmented life, torn between their public persona and their private shadow, between what they show the world and what suffers in silence. True freedom begins when you no longer have to fight against yourself, when you no longer need to wear masks to be worthy of love or shrink yourself to be accepted, when you become the very sanctuary you have always sought in others. This is the pivotal moment. And it does not come from outside, not from courses, relationships, or hollow promises. It comes from the courageous act of looking inward and saying, "I see you. I am here for you. I will not abandon you again." This is the start of a new life, a life that is more whole, more authentic, more luminous, a life in which you no longer have to just survive. You can finally live. Now that you've journeyed this far, I'd like to ask you, what was a moment in your life when you felt your inner child most needed someone? Please share in the comments. Your story might resonate with and inspire others who are on this path. And if this video spoke to you, don't let it end here. Like it and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel, because this is just the beginning. In our next video, we will continue to explore this inner journey, and you won't want to miss it because it will be just as significant as this one. Your transformation doesn't stop here. I'll see you then.